What's poppin', mi gente? It's your boy back with another video. Now that I finally completed the arduous task of ripping all of the enemy and boss sprites from the original SOTN, I'm going to be spending a lot more time doing coding than I have been previously, and that means I can get back to doing these little, I'm not sure if I want to call them tutorial vids, because really these aren't very detailed tutorials. Truth of the matter is, you can explore all over YouTube, you can explore the Unity site and find a lot of material, a lot of PDF files, a lot of videos telling you the basics of Unity. So I'm not really going to go through that, more like discuss the way I've set things up. And that'll serve three different functions. The obvious one is, of course, so everybody gets an update on what's going on with the engine and gets to see progress. Because as they see, seeing is believing. The second one is so that I can maybe give people who don't know how to use Unity well or are just starting off with it a little insight into how they can set up their own fan games. As well as why I've set up particular functions the way I am, because there are a lot of tutorials out here that will tell you how to set something up, but not so much tell you why you should set it up that way. Unity has a lot of features to it, and it can be very overwhelming. I know for me it was when I first started using it, because there's just 10 different ways to do one thing, and it's not always clear which way you should use to accomplish that one task, and not have to worry about running into a million issues later on down the line in your game development. The third reason is kind of for myself, and that would be as I put up these little videos, hopefully other people will see them that maybe have more experience in game development than myself, or more experience with Unity, and might even be able to give me some feedback that'll help me to improve my overall skill set, because a big part of this is that it is a learning endeavor for myself. I really do want to learn more about game development, and the best way to do it is to actually jump into it, experiment, break stuff, fix it, and just kind of be hands-on with things. So anybody who sees these videos and has some kind of constructive criticism, by all means, feel free to jump in. You know, if you want to give me advice on how I can improve better, you know, what I could do to make things a little quicker, etc. Feel free to drop your details. You know, you can comment on the video, or you can comment on my Patreon page if you're one of my little supporters. As well as those of you who see these videos and are thinking, I'm curious to see how he did this particular thing within the engine, whether it's setting up tile mapping, whether it's setting up collisions, things like that. Feel free to put in a request. You know, I'm always happy to create things for my Patreon supporters. You guys are the ones that, you know, keep this project alive, and I thank each and every one of you. So let's go ahead and jump right in. This video is going to show off me doing some animations for Richter, but first I want to briefly talk about what's going on here in the game view. For those who don't know, the game view is basically what's displayed in your game when it's running, while the scene view is kind of the developer view, that this is where you're going to do all your work, where you want to drag and drop objects, move them around, set things up, etc. So we're going to focus on this view up here. And what I mean by that is we want to focus on it because we're going to talk about the cameras. Now, I have set up 3 cameras, and you can see them here under game system. It's usually wise to create a main game system object that can have some global scripts you're going to need. Your cameras will be attached to it, and just overall things that you always want to be active in your game. It makes things a lot easier to follow and a lot less messy. So, first up, you would think, since Alucard is a 2D object, and this is a 2D game, you want to use what's called an orthographic camera for them, which is designed for objects that aren't going to be coming directly at the camera and you want to appear flat. But the thing is, with an orthographic camera, is you really can have things coming at the screen like this if you've selected one. For those of you who don't know what's going on, he's moving back and forth away from the camera. I'm just moving his Z-axis. This is what's used in the prologue stage, Castle Keep, and also in the chapel stage, along with their respective reversed versions, to create that effect with the clouds where they seem like they're coming directly at the camera. And in order to do this, you have to use what's called a perspective camera. So for 2D objects, in my game, I'm using a perspective camera for that reason. It allows me to throw things at the screen. I can create a multitude of effects by doing that. In old Super NES style games, you might have noticed that they had effects that kind of seemed like bastardized attempts at having the object come at the screen. But what they did was they would simply scale them up X and Y wise. And this can be seen in Super Castlevania when you beat the boss known as Coronet, the giant rock titan. As he dies, he seems to get bigger and bigger, and it kind of looks like it's coming at the screen, but it still doesn't look right. Well, that's why. They're just scaling him upward. They're making him look bigger and bigger, and that's all they're doing. It's not that he's actually coming at the screen. It's kind of an optical trick because of the limitations of the Super Nintendo. But if you want to genuinely have it look like it's coming at the screen, A perspective camera is definitely the way you have to go, and it's very easy to do. So definitely using this perspective camera, the screen camera here, as perspective for that reason. However, ironically enough, for the 3D objects, I'm using what's called an orthographic camera for most of them. I think the exception might be the clock tower in the beginning of the prologue stage, the first area of the game. But for most of these 3D objects, we want them to stay flat as they're facing the screen. We want to be able to rotate them around them. We still want them to be 3D objects, which, if you give me a moment, I'll actually do right now. You can see this is a true 3D object. Rotates around. It's got all its faces. I can rotate it X-Y's as well. You can see it's a true 3D object. It's not fake. It's not some kind of 2D one where if I did this with Alucard, I'm going to do the same thing here. See, he disappears. You know, he's flat. He has no depth to him. Is I think the problem, yeah, there's no depth to him. He's flat. However, again, if you want this 3D object to look the way it's supposed to in a classic 2D game, you have to use what's known as an orthographic camera. For those of you wondering, what the hell does this matter? What's the difference? Why don't I show you? Let's go ahead and change it to a perspective camera. Notice the difference automatically. It looks like it's slanted. And I could try to fix that. I could try messing around with the rotation a little bit here. Let's see if I can get it to look flat. Okay, that looks pretty flat. Let's mess around here. No, it looks pretty flat, right? I mean, there's still a slight angle to it, but it's pretty close. Now we don't need to mess with the Z. It's pretty close. So now let's go ahead and walk around a little bit and see what's happening. Notice automatically how it doesn't look flat. We're not facing the side of it anymore. We look like we're not facing the front of it anymore. Rather, we look like we're seeing the sides and the top of it. Well, for those who have played the original game, you'll notice this does not look right at all. I think one of the only objects in the game that does this is the clock tower at the beginning and in the castle keep. And even that, I think, is some kind of bastardized orthographic camera that moves the object the further away you get from it. Because I've tried it with a perspective camera and it just doesn't look right. It doesn't look like the original. So let's set this camera back to orthographic. And voila, it's back to normal. We have it looking the way it should. Let's go ahead and correct this rotation here. Just so we have everything 100% correct. 180, okay. Back to normal. And this is how it looks in the original game as you walk around. This is what's supposed to happen. So that's the reasoning behind why we have two cameras here. The screen camera, which is perspective, is used for 2D objects. The orthographic camera is used for 3D objects. Now what about this fourth camera, or this third camera rather? Well, this main camera is actually what's drawing all of this in the scene view to the main screen. Let me elaborate a little bit. And it's the same for both the ortho and the screen camera, so we'll just look at the screen camera. They both draw to what's known as a render texture. I've named it screen render. You can see that here, and if I move around a little bit with Alucard here, every so often that screen render will update. Oops, I clicked off of it, pardon me. See, an easy way to do it is simply to click back and forth on it, and you'll quickly see it updating. So let's get Alucard to do some motion that'll give me enough time that you can see this update. And that time it updated in real time. Doesn't always work out like that, but let's see here. See if I can get it somehow. Yeah, just doing this seems to let you see what I'm talking about. You can quickly see it's updating to match Alucard every step of the way because the cameras are actually drawing to this render texture here. And I use this render texture because it allows me to scale up a little bit. And it allows me to, I can also use render textures to do extra effects, like you'll notice in the original game, outlines around Alucard will glow red or glow blue, and I don't mean the actual outline for Dark Metamorphosis, but like, let's say for example when he takes damage there's a red kind of outline shaped like him with a gradient over it, or Richter when he does his flaming whip powers up, there's that orange glow over him. They use what's called a copy of the screen, a surface or a screen render, to make a copy of the character, make it one solid color, and then add a gradient over it. So screen renders can be used for things like that, but in this case, it's being used for the main screen, so again, I can scale up the pixels a little bit. If I scale this down, he just wouldn't look as good in the game. He wouldn't look as crisp or higher res as he does, while still looking pixelated. And I found it very hard to duplicate this effect without a screen render. There were other ways to do it, but it just wasn't as efficient, and it was just a royal nightmare to keep it working properly. You'll notice he does look pixelated here, but look how high res everything is. I mean, this is a huge view here. It's 5:4. Let's go ahead and change it to 16:10. See how pixelated he still looks, but everything doesn't look all messed up and broken? this is what I was going for, a retro kind of effect. For those of you who like a little more blurring, well, don't worry. I have that as well, as you can see here. A little bit of bilinear interpolation to make him look a little smoother. And what about scan lines? What about those of us who are hardcore and just want this game to look old school? Well, I have that as well. I actually didn't need to go back out of it because I actually set it up so with a key press, I can put it on and off. Look how pretty that looks now. It's a little darker because of the scan lines, but just look how pretty and smoother those graphics look. And what if we want the blurring too? Well, let's put the blurring on. Let's go ahead and drop that on. And there you go. Now it looks even smoother while still looking high res. And this, without that render texture, would not look nearly this good. It just gives me so much more freedom to do so many things. So these two cameras draw these objects to the render texture, and then this main camera shows the render texture on your game screen. That render texture is actually way over here out of sight. Right there. The camera's positioned right over it. And the texture is attached to the camera so that if I move this main camera around, let's say by accident I'm messing around, that texture goes with it. It's always in view, it's always in focus, it never affects anything. They should always be bonded together. So, as I said, this camera does the 3D objects. Let's disable it for a moment. Oops. Actually, let's hit play first. And let's get out of full screen. And let's first do this screen camera with the 2D objects. If I click it off, you'll notice it still moves around because the object is still there. We can see in the scene view, Alucard still exists. He wasn't deleted, just the camera shut off, so everything that's shown, including this solid object, isn't shown anymore. The sky's still shown, but that's because I'm using this camera to draw that background color. Now, I am going to re-enable this camera, but I do need to change something here so we don't get what's called a Hall of Mirrors effect. Yep, we have solid color here because I want to disable this camera. Oops, give me 1 second. This might be a bit of a pain to do. Okay, so put that back to depth only the way it was, and now let's go ahead and disable this camera, the ortho camera. And you'll notice we're getting a bit of an effect here because the camera's gone, but there's no background here because this is set up to be depth only. Because if I put on a background, because this camera copies the screen first and then this camera copies second, with a full background put up on this 2D screen camera, it would overwrite everything underneath it and you wouldn't see what's on the ortho cam. But for the moment, let's change this so you can see what I'm talking about. Notice you don't see the 3D object anymore. Now let's go ahead and put this back. And voila. So there you go. That's the use of those 3 cameras. One camera for 3D objects, one camera for 2D, and then the last camera draws everything to the screen. That's the setup I'm using currently. The CRT effect is attached to the main camera. The blurring is attached to the screen camera, but it affects both of them, as you can see here. Okay, so it'll blur both the 3D and 2D objects. It wouldn't make any sense if it just blurred the 2D objects and the 3D ones got no enhancement. That would look stupid. The blurring is actually here because if I put it on the main camera, it does a lot more blurring for every change I put below here. Putting it on the screen camera itself gives me a lot more control and lets me really fine-tune how much blurring I want this game to have overall. It makes it a much more gradual change every time I alter it. And that just gives me much more control, which is a big deal, I think, overall in a game. Okay, so now I've got this bare bones scene set up. I've talked about the cameras and why they're set up the way they are. Let's move on to talking about Legacy Richter. And Legacy is just a fancy term for classic or old. This is for the original Rondo of Blood version of Richter that I'm going to be animating and coding in next for the prologue stage. Now, I wanted a bare bones scene for this so there aren't a lot of things getting in the way, because it makes it easier and quicker to just keep selecting his object, setting up his animations, testing him out initially, and then go from there. Once I've done the initial testing, then I'll go back to my old debug room that a lot of you were used to seeing, and I'll run around in there and try to break him, make sure everything works correctly. But I figured just to keep things simple, start off in a blank room basically. So the first thing I want to do, we got to minimize that so it's out of the way, and I want to create a new object. I'm just right-clicking here and creating empty. And I'm going to name this object Old Richter. Now, this is not going to be where I actually put his sprites. They're not going to be attached to this object. This is just a container of sorts. And the reason I want a container is because Richter's going to have several objects attached to him. He's going to need an object for his sprite that's also going to have his animator component attached to it. He's going to need an object for his vampire killer attached as well. And he's going to need an objects for effects of little special things, you know, that'll need to go into the system for him. And if I don't make those children of this, what's called parent object, I would have to move all those objects around one by one, and when I do animations, it just gets messy and creates a major headache. So keep that in mind. If you're going to create something like a player or an enemy with multiple pieces, always create a top level object that acts as a container so that you can move all of them around at once. If you later figure out you made some error here or there, it'll make your life much quicker. So next, let's go ahead and create another object. It's going to be what's called a child of this, much like for Alucard here. And we're going to also name that player sprite. And you can see here's a perfect example in the hierarchy of his weapons are attached under the player so that everything stays aligned properly. His shield, various effects, mist form, things like that. And then you can see outside of that I have audio sources, the effect for Chardy's MP, colliders, and the copy cam is just used here to basically always copy the current frame of animation he's in for like effects like the outlines that surround him, stuff like when he levels up, etc. But this container here just makes life much easier because everything is attached directly to it. So I just move this container or parent object and everything under here will move with it. So, okay, we've got this set up here. Let's set up player sprite. And now we obviously going to need a sprite renderer component for him. So let's go ahead and do that. If I can remember exactly where it is in my first try, it should be under rendering, sprite renderer. I am going to change this material eventually, but for now, let's go ahead and first change his layer to player. This is the sorting layer that tells me what layer I want him to be drawn on. So if I picked enemies or bosses, it'd be one layer down, and he'd appear in the same layer as enemies or bosses. This way, since he's the player, he'll appear above the bosses, enemies, items when he's drawn on screen. There's a little more that goes into this, like you have to make sure, depending on what camera order you're drawn in on, like for example, anything on camera 0 should be overwritten on anything drawn on camera 1 because I've set camera 1 to have more depth or priority than camera 0. But this is assuming everything that's drawn using camera 1, well, this helps you select the order as to what's drawn on top of what. Once again, I'm going to go back to Alucard. We have an animator here. These are just notes, so I'm going to put the animator above the sprite render. I'm going to need all this other stuff in here too. This box collider 2D for Alucard is just when he takes damage from enemies. These colliders here are for collisions with solid objects, as you can see. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. We need an animator and cycle state script. Let's wait on that. Let's keep it nice and simple. Let's just put in the animator component. We're going to shortly need that anyway. Right now we're just going to get through the animations, and then we're going to come back to everything else as we go along here. Again, be consistent, move it up. So we have animator, sprite renderer, sprites default. Right now, you're not seeing anything on the screen here because he has no sprite. He's totally invisible. Let's first zero out these values. Or we don't even need to do that. We'll just go to edit, snap settings, because I have everything snapping to the nearest 0.1. Because of the settings I used on the sprite sheets, I use 10 pixels per unit. Instead of using 1 for each bit of movement, we use 0.1. That had to do with the fact that originally when I was working in Unity, there were some issues with just using 1 for movement instead of 0.1, and at this point it would take way too long to recode everything. Now that's not an issue anymore, so just stick with 0.1 being a 1 pixel movement. You can see when I hit that button, it snapped everything to the nearest 0.1. Okay, so now I'm going to hold control and pull on this arrow here to move him over here. And let's go ahead and put in his default sprite, which I've already cut up the idle screen, so we'll pick idle, drag it in here. Okay, so he's positioned properly, but for some reason on the camera, he's not showing up correctly. So, what's causing that issue here? He's got layer default for one thing. Let's go ahead and pick player. Make sure everything is consistent here. And again, you want to be consistent with your old objects. It just makes life much easier. Like I have a tag here of player for Alucard, so let's set that as well in the parent object. The layer here for both of them is default. Player sprite, player untagged up here. And again, this is all just being very consistent. The Z value needs to definitely be 0. He's going to be at the camera then. We don't want that. And let's put him flat on the ground. He's 1 pixel, a couple of pixels up actually, not 1. Now let's make sure we move Richter down one so he's flat on the ground. And there we go. That's going to be his initial sprite. Now let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. Notice he's not animating. Nothing's going on with him. He's not moving at all. He's just standing in place there. But that's because we haven't actually set up any animations for him, which is something we're going to have to do next. So let's go ahead and we're going to need to create a new animator component for him. Let's go down to his folder. First up, again, being consistent, it should be in main animations. I'll just call it Richter. You can see I've set up several folders for him already. Some of these have sprites, some don't. Animator controller is what we're looking for. Oops, I drug it into the directory. Let's just call it Richter to be consistent here, but it's not really important. Name it whatever you want, honestly. Let's put it in the animations folder. Now we're going to drag this over to the player sprite. Okay, but we still haven't set up any animations. And you'll notice this if we go ahead and zoom in here to the animator window, or the animator window, so I almost said the animator screen, pardon me. It's got me stuttering there. Notice there's nothing here. Absolutely nothing. You know, these are just the basic ones, any state, exit, entry. I mean, there's nothing much to talk about there. So let's go ahead and create his first new animation. I'm going to just call this idle. Nice and simple, nothing too crazy, and drag it in over here. This is going to be his base animation state, which means it's the state it'll default to whenever we have Richter on screen. Let's put it somewhere over here because we're going to have other animations that are going to be coming into play. But now you can see idle appears down here. Let's look on player sprite. I'm going to hit record here. And we already have idle 0 in there, so I'm going to do a little trick because I want the game to know I want this animation's first idle sprite to be idle 0. Let's do idle 1 and then idle 0. This way it'll overwrite it, because since idle 0 was already in there, if I just drug idle 0 in, it wouldn't have registered here. So I just quickly drug in idle 1 to change it, and then idle 0 to correct it, and you can see idle 0. Alright, now you guys are going to have to excuse me for a moment. I've got to pull up a file. I've written down these timings for the animations in advance, so I'll be right back with you in just a second. I'm going to pull that up on my other screen so I know how to set it up here. I know what sprites to use, I know what timings to use, and it makes things much quicker. Okay, so I'm back. I'm going to briefly show you guys what I set up in Excel here, just so you guys can see how I did this. So you have Richter, idle animation. This is the frame number, which the idle animation I think goes up to 46. And then you have the timing for each one. So this just makes it much easier for me to now set things up and know how many steps each frame needs to be displayed for. So let's take this one. And it's in 0 because when I look in the original game, frame 1 uses frame 0, which is going to be, it's easier anyway because all the animations start at 0:00 in the animator window, as you can see here. So now I know, after looking at this, that this first sprite is going to be displayed until 0:07. And then I know when I get to the next sprite, same thing, it's going to add 7 to that, so it'll be 0:14, the next sprite after will be 0:21, etc. until we get through all 47 sprites. Good times, lots of fun here, right? Now, for those of you who are very astute, you might have noticed that while I say what frame number each timing is for, I don't say what sprite to use for each frame number. And the reason is because Richter's sprites have been redone completely, and they've each been put on their own sheet, so it's pretty easy to figure out. But more importantly, as the artist went along, I had him create GIF files for me, so I could easily glance over if I wasn't sure and check and see the animation. But for this one, I can tell you up front, it loops from 0 to 3, and then when he starts to change over to posing, it just goes through each of the sprites individually till it reaches 10, and we're done. 11 here is just used for shifting to something else. Totally separate, so I won't go into details on that, but it's a pretty simple animation. I know I'm going to loop 0 to 3 a couple of times as it slows down, and that's it. And then when I get to the very end, okay, well I just go through each of these sprites one by one, and we're done. So, a nice simple animation, perfect to start off with. So let me go ahead and put this Excel sheet on my other monitor. You guys won't be able to see it anymore, but I will, and that's the important part because I want to see the timings and I want to know how many times I'm going to repeat this. So let me see. It looks like for the first 19 frames, it's just going to do the whole pattern of 0, 1, 2, 3 with the same timing. So that's very easy to do. Let's go ahead and do this. This is 7, 14, 21, and now all I have to do is, let me line these up first, because all I'm going to do after is copy and paste them, but I need to make sure the positions are right. Okay, so great. Now his feet are lined up properly. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this one right here, and I'm going to do this. I just need to copy it, because I know the timing is 7 for the first 19 frames of animation. So 21, let's go to 28, and paste it. And you can see it's correct. It's looping properly. You can see a jump at the end because I haven't finished the animation, but you see how it's looping correctly here? We have the correct animation going. Okay, great. So now I need to do this a couple more times because we need a total of 19 frames in here. Right now we only have 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Total of 19. So let's just go ahead and do this again. Zoomed out a little much here. This is at 49. So now I need to go to 56 and do that again. And this one is at 77. So now I need to go to 84 and do that again. And now we have a total of, I believe, 16 frames. Yep, we have 16 frames. So we need a total of 19. Since this animation changed up a little, nope, actually we should be fine just doing it the way I was gonna do it. Let's go ahead and do this. And this one is at 105, so let's go ahead and go to 113. Okay, so now we have the first series of animations done with 7 steps between each one. We have an extra one over here that I'm gonna rip out. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm gonna leave that there because this would be frame 20, which increases to 8. Okay, we don't need these little positionings though. Repeated over and over for, well, yes we do, I take that back. We do need them because they do change between them until it's the 0, -2, 0, -1, 0, yep, so we do need those in there. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought this first sprite here, idle 0, had the same positioning as idle 1, it doesn't. So we do need these little positioning ticks here. It's not a big deal anyway, it doesn't hurt a damn thing whether you have them in there or not. So now let's zoom in a little bit, because if I pull my sheet back up here, we're going to see that we have 1, no, actually let's just do this, 4 frames at 8, and then we have 4 at 9, I can tell you, 4 at 10, 4 at 11, and then it slows down a little more here. We'll worry about those when we get to it, but this is going to be nice and simple. This is going to be very simple to do. It's pretty quick. Okay. So now let's go back and let's take these first 4, and these are going to be separated by 8 each, and you can see it as you can confirm here by doing this, 135. So now let's separate this one, 143, go to that position, and we're just going to go ahead and paste these in. I don't know why it isn't doing it. It'd be in a pain right now, so okay. Let's Control-C these again. I'm not sure why I was doing that, being an absolute pest. The joys of Unity, joys of technology. Okay, so now these 2 are apart by 8. These 2 need to be moved over 1 each. Nice and simple. 1. 1. And you see you can check this little number right here to see if you're not 100% certain. Worth doing in longer animations. Takes a few more seconds, but who gives a damn? You know, better to get it right the first damn time than to mess it all up. Okay? Idle 3. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay. So now we need to go 9 away from this one. 168. Okay. There we go. Let's verify that it's 9 away. Yep, 168. It says these have 8 each. They each need to be moved over 1. 1, 1, and 1. Okay, and let's just do a quick check to make sure nothing got gummed up in the works. So 9, 9, 9, 9. Now we got to split them apart by 10 each. So let's go ahead and move the cursor to 205. And let's go ahead and highlight these. Oops, let's undo that. I didn't mean to drag them. These, copy, paste. Let's make sure we got it correct. It looks like it's right to me though. Yep, 205. So now once again, we got to move these all over by ones. They're at 10 each. This one I'm not going to bother checking because I can see clearly what lines it's going on to, and I know it's correct. Okay, so next up we have to do 11 apart. And you notice there's an order to this madness here. Let's go to 246, hit enter, copy these, paste. Yep, they're 11 apart for the first one, so now each of these need to be moved over 1. 1 and 1. Okay. So now if I look on my sheet, I can see that there's 2 frames at 12 and 2 frames at 13. So I'm going to go ahead and once again move the cursor to where I want it. This is a long animation. It's perfect for teaching you the basics though. 291. And I'm going to copy these and paste. Okay, let's make sure everything's at the right position still. Yep. Now these need to be moved over 1. Here. This one displays for 12. This one displays for 12. And now this one needs to display for 13. So I need to move these over 2 each. 2. 2. And now let's just make sure I got everything right because this is where things get funky. Okay? 11. 11. 12. This one should be 12. This one should be 13, so it should go to 316, right? 329. Okay, cool. And now the next few, well, they have a timing of 15. Go ahead and take these last 4. 344. You know what? Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so this is at 15. This next one needs to be at 359, so let's move it over 3. 3. And this next one should be at 614. That last one should be at 629. And then I'm going to take this first sprite here, hold up. Make sure I keep it consistent. 0, 1, 2. Should go 0, 1, 2, 3 the whole time. Yeah, I'm zooming in. I'm looking over here on the right to just quickly see that the animation's going the way it's supposed to be. 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. It should be a pattern there, and it should loop back around to 0. So I'm going to need to copy in 2 more sprites, I think. 0, 1, 2, and I'm going to need to copy in 3 because I wanted to loop back to sprite 1. I don't have to do this. I could leave it just the way it is, but I do want it to loop back to sprite 0. Since the animation has changed, the original one just looped between 3 sprites. This one loops between 4s, so I have to adjust for that. Not really a big deal. Just put in sprite 3 and sprite 1 more time each. It'll make the animation a little longer, but none of you guys are ever going to notice that in game, I promise you. You'll never be able to tell that it's been made any longer. It's that little of a change. This one is at 404, so this one needs to be at 419. And I think we should be good to go there. Let's zoom out some. Now, I could have done this programmatically. I could have made one animation and changed the timing of how quick the animation plays over and over your code, but this is a lot faster than messing around with something like that. That's just a royal pain in the ass to do. So now, this sprite is going to stay in this position for 128 steps. Pardon me. For 128 steps. This one right here. So now let's add 128 to 419. That should be something along the lines of, let's see, 419 plus 128, 427, 447, 547. Hit enter so the cursor moves over there. And now we need to start working on our new sprites. It's going to be sprite 4 should be the first one. And I'm just going to drag it over here. There we go. Let's make sure the positioning is correct. And this is where on the right hand side I'm going to reference my animation and make sure all the positioning is right. What I'm doing is looking at a GIF I have here that was set up for me to check the references. Okay, the front boots match up. So, yep, front boots are right where they should be. Excellent, excellent. Now let's go ahead and get this Excel file up on my end. I can see that this frame is supposed to sit there for 4 steps. It looks like the rest of the animation is 4 steps apart. So let's go to 551. Let's go to 555, and I'll worry about the positioning after I've gotten the sprites in. That makes life a little easier. Oops. I meant to hold the cursor, I accidentally just clicked it. There we go. 559. $563. $567. Last but not least, 571. And that's it, we've got all the sprites in. So now it's just a matter of getting the positioning correct, which is pretty easy. Again, this animation, I'm going to go and just quickly show you guys it. I just use this as a reference here. It's not a very good animation program, but I can quickly see where the boots position themselves in reference to one another, relative to one another is the word I'm looking for. So yeah, the next one, I just need to make sure those front boots align and we're good. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Nope, it shifts back some, so this needs to be moved over slightly to the right. Let's do this, move it a little over. I'll use this line for measurement. That little gray line in the background. Okay? And then I believe the next one is the same thing. It's just make sure the front boot position matches up. It doesn't, so let's move this one over 1. For the rest of them, it's nice and simple. Front boot, front boot, front boot. Just make sure it matches up. The Y positioning is obvious. His feet got to be on the ground, so that's simple enough. Okay. Make sure these are all using a tangent of constant because I don't want them slowly moving into position between frames. I want them to move into position automatically, instantly. And voila, here's our animation for idle. Took a little bit to do this. Here you go, and you notice it's looping around here only because this is previewing it. In game, it won't loop. It'll stop at this last sprite because we chose to not have it loop. So, we just set up our first animation, idle. Pretty simple stuff. I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. We can play the game, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see it's only gonna play it once. Just watch Richter, it's going to play this animation once, and that's going to be that. It's going to stop. Versus if I chose to have it loop, then it would loop over and over the way you were seeing in the preview window. Alright, and with that, I think I've said everything I want to say. Next video, I think I'm going to cover setting up the box colliders that are going to be the actual hitbox for Richter when he takes damage from enemies, fireballs, hazards, things like that. I might have said this earlier in the vid. The collision boxes for actual tiles are static. They're the same for every character, so no need to set those up. But when it comes to the individual damage boxes for each sprite, those do have to be set up. I think that'd be great to cover in another video. Meanwhile, if you haven't joined my Patreon page, subscribe right now. Every little bit helps. If I could get this up to $1,000 a month, progress would be so much faster because I could hire multiple sprite artists, get things done. If you can't contribute financially, I mean, and everybody should be able to contribute $1. I mean, you can be a $1 subscriber and it helps. You know, if 100 people join for $1, that makes a difference. $5 a month, I don't think that's asking much either. So if you can at least do that, I'd really appreciate it. I could also use anybody who's a spriter can feel free to reach out to me. You know, people that could do sound effects, reach out to me. But again, people with serious interest only. People who have time to contribute to the project. I could also use designers, people who, specifically stage designers, people who can come up with conceptual information for new stages. As I have a lot of things I want to create, and I have a lot of ideas of my own, but it doesn't hurt to get input from the community. You know, a lot of people I know have a lot of ideas. They just don't know where to put those ideas, way to put them to use. So obviously the Patreon page isn't where to put all those ideas up. If you want to do that, go to the forums. There's a link to it on the Patreon page. If you just want to talk to other like-minded Castlevania fans, Facebook group is good for that. But again, if you want to support this project financially, donations on PayPal are an option if you want to do a one-time thing. But Patreon's your best bet. Patreon supporters always get the priority because you, my loyal patrons, are the ones who keep this project alive. I say it all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it. Thank you to each and every one of you, from my dollar coin members all the way up to that one crazy gold member I've had for a couple of months now. And believe me when I say I really appreciate you. You know, your donation is massive, making a huge difference here. I've got a good number of black bag members who have been with me for several months too, and that does add up. You know, the blue bag members and the red bag members, hey, you know what? 10 of these is $50. 10 of these is $100. This all adds up quickly. I'm not looking to be one of those guys with 2,000 patrons. I'm looking to get to about $1,000 a month, and I think that'd be more than enough. All right, so that's all I've got to say. I've run my mouth long enough. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what kind of videos you'd like to see next. Let me know what you thought of this video. I could use the feedback, and I'll talk to you all soon. Peace.